So first I'd like to note that aesthetically, right, if I were in a court of law, and what do we mean by law? What do we mean by justice? What do we mean by good judgment? If I were in what we call a court of law, I would have presented myself more aesthetically pleasing. But if we frame it right, if we crop the picture right, if we take out my greasy hair, right, if we make it look a little better, then 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 maybe it's acceptable. If we frame my face right, if we take out the fray. This is how I grow. Many of you may not, but let me ask you, do any of you clip your nose hairs or eyebrow hairs or ear hairs if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s? Dye your beard, etc. So I recognize the displeasure my aesthetics are causing you, and there's just cause, because not only am I aesthetically displeasing, but I am unclean. I'm a flawed vessel. There are clean vessels, there are vessels of honor, there are virtuous virgin vessels of honor who also look aesthetically displeasing. There are poor rhetoricians who speak truth, and there are good or great or effective rhetoricians who lie. I'm picking up from my previous video. And I'm trying to lasso that train of thought. So forgive me for my stumbling. There's a couple loose ends I'd like to try tie up. I don't know if I'll get there. Again, this is for paperwork and historiosity. So please watch my first paperwork video. This video will be called Paperwork 2. Talking about Dugin and Mearsheimer, Russia and America, two intellects whose definitions meet and are not discussed. Discussed, D-I-S-C-U-S-S-E-D, not D-I-S-G-U-S-T. Though we call disgust disgusting. There are healthy people and there are unhealthy people. And some people's guts are healthy, and some people's guts are unhealthy, and both possess microbiota. Poo. And to the regular person, healthy poo and unhealthy poo look the same, and both are disgusting. To the normal person, to the scientist, or to the Ethiopian Essene tradition that rises up and coalesces Egyptology, Old, New Testament, and Islamism, which is a subsect of the Old. People may think in Abrahism it came Judaism, Christianity, Islam. No. Islam is the outbirth of Abraham through Ishmael. Judaism is the outbirth of Abraham through Isaac. Christianity, well, the way we know Christianity here in the West is as coming up through that Isaac lineage and not recognizing that because the way the family tree braids, Ishmael has been there all along. The problem in the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict is exactly the conflict between Hagar and Sarah, and is exactly the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael. It's the conflict between what we call justice and reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. South Africa, it's happened a lot through Africa and in other places as well, but truth and reconciliation, a quote-unquote legally binding form of truth and reconciliation. Because when we're watching a trial, when people are speaking legalistically, we still know what they mean. We know what they mean. We know what they're really saying, even though they're trying, because people argue the letter of the law. When the letter of the law wins over the spirit, that's where truth and reconciliation fail. But if the system weren't set up as an opposition of opponents where someone has to win and someone has to fail, and we put it into truth and reconciliation, healing. You did wrong. You did everything wrong. Let's say I'm in a situation and you did everything wrong. What's the justice that I would seek if I were just, if I were balanced? If I were balanced, what justice would I seek? I'd seek that if you did everything wrong, which you didn't, but if you did everything wrong and I did everything right, which I didn't, but if that's the case, and if I were right about everything, what justice would I seek? That you're forgiven. If it came to light that you did everything wrong and I did everything right, and the crowd, the masses, came to know that I did everything right and you did everything wrong. So then there I am upon the pedestal among my people, praising me for having done right as you have wronged me. What's my responsibility in that moment of power? To forgive you publicly, to heal you publicly, to give you everything because I've been made all right and you've been made all wrong, and God knows that ain't how it goes. Because if it's been made known, that ain't the whole story. Because God knows I did do something wrong, even if everyone else doesn't know that. And God knows you did something right, even if everyone else doesn't know that, and vice versa. I've been on both sides, and mostly actually on the on the lesser. For good reason, even when good reason ain't just cause. But what I wanted to say about Mearsheimer and Dugin is also Dugin has called upon the concept of Eurasianism. Very important, because it's about the way circles intersplice in a Vesica Pisces, what do they call it, isometric grid. Not a Cartesian grid, an isometric grid. It depends three-dimensionally, or six-dimensionally, or four-dimensionally. In dynamic three-dimensionality, depending on the way in which that three-dimensionality spins. Like, in space-time, we must have at least quote-unquote 3 dimensions. But because it's space-time, there also must be movement, and that grid can move in infinite ways. But anyway, this is just paperwork. The isometric. Is it isometric or grid, not the Cartesian grid? Because there are Vesica Pisces. Overlaps of ideas. So, Dugin, Alexander Dugin of Russia, talks about Eurasianism. Similarly, most prominently, I've heard LaRouche talk about the Trans-Pacific partnership, so to speak. It's loosely associated with the BRICS. What is that? Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, China, something. God forbid, Spain. But anyway, what's most interesting, as I discussed 2 videos back, is slippery time. Because in a sense, we're running a linear race over a sphere. And if we think of nations as individuals in a 400-yard sprint around the track. So you have several, right? Let's say you have the G7 on a, track and field, sport, Olympian, more or less 400-meter track. Well, some are coming forward, some are going back, some, it ebbs and flows. The movement of histories, the movement of politics, the movements of peoples, of ideas, moves that way in regions across the globe linearly. So in that way, progress, which is a way of defining time, slips across that surface, yet accumulatively. Coalescively as a whole reaches toward something. And interestingly enough, as Dugin is associated with Russia, and he's a political philosopher, who people in the West say is Putin's Rasputin, even though Dugin himself, right? Dugin's playing a tight fucking game. He ain't playing chess, he ain't playing Go. He's playing a bigger game than Go. Dugin, who what we call respected journalists in the West call Putin's Rasputin, has called Putin an agent of liberalism in the same way that Mersheimer has called Bush an agent of liberalism, which is, I don't know how many people in the world actually understand that distinction. You could probably put them all on a plane and crash it in the ocean, and then no one in the whole world would fucking know what the fuck they're talking about. There's that few people who understand that distinction and are speaking about it. At least. People are speaking about it, you could put on a Cessna. People are speaking about it, you could put on a fucking paddle boat. Dugin and Mersheimer. But anyway, what's interesting, as I said 3 videos back, is that the story, the mythos, actually precedes the logos, because the mythos is teleology. The mythos is telepathy. The mythos is prophecy. The mythos is clairvoyance, right? The imagination reaches where physicality can't. The imagination is superluminal. It's not just superluminal, but the imagination possesses a quality of superluminalism. It reaches both back and forward through time. We can see what there isn't a record for in the past, and we can see what there is no algorithm for in the future with our imagination, if we tune it right. The logos is tuned with ratios. The mythos is tuned with morality. True goodness. Beyond good and evil. Well, it's beyond good and evil. Well, one thing beyond good and evil is great. Because great is better than good, and great kills evil. The other thing beyond good and evil is horror. Because horror overwhelms the good and lists the evil is above the evil. So there's no clear answer to be on good and evil. Once we get beyond good and evil, we're left with the difference between great and horror. Heaven and hell. Choose this day whom you will serve, right? Now you could serve heaven while going to hell. To serve heaven. Right? I'm not saying that's the answer. It doesn't come up much. Also, I have just a little bit left. A little more of the bloodless sacrifice. A dirty person can take a shower. A clean person can roll in the dust. Am I smart enough to tell the difference? Not yet, but I'm working on it. The story, the mythos, in time precedes the logos as an expression. The logos, below time, or beyond time, precedes the mythos. But in time, the mythos precedes the logos. So, as far as Dugin's conception of Eurasianism is concerned, what's happening? There is this bridge being built between Catholicism and the Greek Orthodox Church. Do not underestimate, or rather, between Catholicism and the broader Orthodox Church. Do not underestimate this. It's pretty close. It's pretty much the biggest thing that's actually happening in the world that a few people are talking about, which is what makes it so big. And it's bigger than all the other shit people are talking about. This bridge that is being built between the Catholic and the greater Orthodox Church, primarily the Greek Orthodox Church, but also the Egyptian Gnostic Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, the Ukrainian, this whole fucking thing is the biggest thing happening in time in the world today. The phoenix will rise from the ashes. Will rise like the phoenix. It's a reference to Greek philosophy. It's a reference to the book of Revelations. Or at least certainly to John. And it's a reference to, because what is the phoenix that rose from the ashes? It is the Russian Orthodox Church. If we boil things down religiously, and this is a gross simplification and a gross aesthetic truncation, a gross symbolic condensation. What happened in World War II from the ordinary American's perspective, put into the simplest of religious terms? The Christians saved the Jews from the pagans. But that's a very small piece of the story. Because World War II is also associated with incredible racism in Asia, which still exists today. Even though most people from the West can't tell this Asian, this nationality from the other nationality in Asia. Most people in the West can't tell a Korean from someone from Japan, from someone from Korea. And in fact, many times, people in those countries can't tell until someone speaks. Racism is still alive and well, even in places where we can't clearly conceive race distinctions. It's a problem. Also, we in the West, when considering World War II, don't appreciate that, I guess, so I've heard it said, that Russia basically won 4/5 of World War II. So we talk about the Allies, the Allies, the Allies, and Russia pretty much did the fucking dirty work. And we call them godless and we call them atheists. But that was just a handful of people running the government. Very powerful, smart, intelligent people running the government. Meanwhile, because what happened, man? You had Nicholas with that big old fucking phoenix symbol for the flag. Nicholas King. Kaiser. Whatever. And then the Bolsheviks came, all that. He had Rasputin. Bad news for him. But Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, was stamped out, was burnt down to the fucking ground. The symbol of the phoenix, the most famous symbol of the phoenix of the age. And what happened? Pretty much the day communism fell in the USSR. What happened? Orthodoxy it took 2 minutes. It took 2 fucking minutes, man. And what did they bring with them? Well, first of all, because they're Russian, they have the Russian language. Russia basically has one of the greatest claims linguistically to ancient Greece because of their alphabet. They also have a great claim to Egypt because of the garb of their patriarchy. There are other reasons, but the garb of the Russian Orthodox Church harkens strongly back to Egypt in a dissimilar but supporting way as the entirety of Islam. I dare say neither get it correct. Sorry. And of course we know Judaism is birthed, or I should say, Hebrew, the language, is birthed out of hieratic text of Egypt, the phonetic hieratic text of Egypt, of Kemet, whatever. But anyway, there's this movement. It's not below the surface. It has popped its head above the surface. There are many dialogues happening between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church, and there is and expressed even among officials, even among clergy on both sides, and lay people on both sides. There is this yearning for togetherness, and that is the mythos. Religion is the ultimate mythos. Established, persevering ritual is the epitome, the pinnacle of the mythos, which is the story, which is the symbolism, which is the right brain, yada yada yada. And that connection, that drawing together, is the mythological aspect, the spiritual aspect, the religious, the traditional, the ritualistic, in every way that ritual means ritual, coming together of hope. We're seeing the marrying of true hope and faith is on the horizon. And that marrying of the Orthodox and the Catholic Christian Church. Now, I'm not either. I am on the perimeter. I am on the outside. I will, in my lifetime, in my fleshly lifetime, I will not belong to either of these churches. I may visit, I may go see, I may praise. They are both indispensable, absolutely necessary. But so are folk like me. We are part of the greater omni There are a few reasons why I'm at the very outskirts. But it's still my job to provide testimony for you, as you have provided testimony for me. I'm only relativistically autonomous, but absolutely I'm lined up with the same center you is. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is the Eurasianism, that Dugin speaks of, is actually manifesting already in the world religiously, very subtly and genuinely, and from the heart, not from necessarily the top down, and not necessarily from the bottom up. It's not a grassroots movement, and it's not an interstellar movement. It's not from the mountaintop, and it's not from the tunnels. It's coming from a moderate zone, not the moderate zone, but a moderate zone among moderate zones, the middle of moderate zones. I'm not saying either Dugin or Mersheimer are right about everything, but what I'm saying is they meet, and what I'm saying is Dugin called it way back, he's still calling it, and nobody's recognizing what's actually happening in the mythos, which in time precedes the expression of the logos, depending on how we define logos. It can be associated with legalistic Not legal, but legalistic. Because the mythos is also legal speech. Once again, I wanted to get much more to Mary. I'll just say one little thing is that, the most perfect thing, if you're a Christian, philosophically, mythologically, Jesus is not God's creation. Jesus is God. So we say no one was ever perfect except for Jesus. But God had to create his most perfect creation. God's most perfect creation is Mary, Mom. God had to create a spiral that the spiral of God came from. God, in stillness, had to create a spiral that God himself could be born from spiraling. God's most perfect creation in this world where we live is Mary. The most, if you're a Christian, if you're into this thing, God's most perfect creation was not Jesus. Jesus was God. God's most perfect creation is Mary. God was incomplete without Mary, because God couldn't come to be to know God. It's a paradox, man. It's the Paschal mystery. I'm not saying all this to be like right about something. I'm saying this to help engage myself and any one or two or three folk who might ever watch this to, engage in that mystery, hopefully without losing your mind. Whether you look pretty that day or not, right? Like, beyond the aesthetic, and even beyond the health. I shouldn't say that. I'm struggling with health.